Good morning. I am very pleased to welcome all of you to the 2021 Atlee and Winifred Beechy Peace, Justice, and Reconciliation Lectureship. My name is Regina Shan-Stoltzfus. I'm Professor of Peace, Justice, and Conflict Studies here at Goshen College, and I chair the Bible, Religion, and Peace, Justice, Conflict Studies Department. A few words about the lectureship. This lecture series has been established by the family of Atlee and Winifred Beechy. Atlee and Winifred Beechy were both graduates of Goshen College in the 1930s. They returned to campus in 1949, where they worked for the next 34 years, dedicating their lives to counseling and educating students within the broader context of promoting peace and justice in our communities, our nation, and our world. Atlee helped found our peace program. He also served as Dean of Students, Director of Counseling Services, Professor of Peace Studies, Education, and Psychology. Winifred was a teacher, writer, and coordinator of the Peace and Social Concerns Committee for the Mennonite Church. The lectureship that bears their names was established to memorialize and commemorate the exemplary commitment to peace, justice, and reconciliation apparent in the daily and professional lives of Atlee and Winifred. It is designed to provide an opportunity for our community to focus on, re-examine, and promote those ideals through a public lecturer with knowledge and expertise in peace, justice, and reconciliation issues in current local, national, and international affairs. We are very, very grateful to the family of Atlee and Winifred Beechy for establishing this important work. Our speaker this morning, Rob Vander Giessen-Reitsma, is a 2005 graduate of Goshen College. Rob co-founded the intentional community and nonprofit organization Culture is Not Optional in 2001. In 2009, Culture is Not Optional purchased a historic school property in Three Rivers, Michigan to renovate as the Huss Project, a center for building community and imagination through art, food, and play. Rob manages an AmeriCorps cohort and programming at the Huss Project, including an urban farm, weekly summer farmers market, a summer lunch program, events, festivals, and more. He also actively serves on the board of World Fair, a nonprofit volunteer-run fair trade and grocery store in downtown Three Rivers. Running through all of this work is a theme of imagining and creating spaces where all people can flourish. Rob lives with his partner, Kirsten, in downtown Three Rivers, part of the traditional territory of the Potawatomi and Peoria peoples. Rob, welcome back to Goshen College this morning. We look forward to what you will share with us.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Regina. Good morning, friends. My name, as Regina just said, is Rob Vander Giessen-Reitsma, speaking to you through the magic of technology from the traditional lands of the Potawatomi and Peoria peoples in the St. Joseph River watershed. I'm the executive director and a core community member of Culture is Not Optional, an intentional community and nonprofit located in what is now called Three Rivers, Michigan. I sincerely wish that we were able to be together in person today, and I hope that before too long that will be possible. I want to thank the amazing Peace, Justice, and Conflict Studies Department at Goshen College for their invitation to speak today, especially Regina and Joe Lichty. I must confess that organizing my thoughts for this talk has been more than a bit of a struggle. I feel like many of my thoughts on identity and place are shifting under my feet. I know that I can no longer think as I once did about such things, but I have not arrived anywhere new yet, if arriving is even possible. The last 2 years have been filled with massive construction projects, a new AmeriCorps program, emergency COVID loans, shifting entire operations in response to a pandemic, grant proposals, trying to keep staff and volunteers safe, deadlines, rebuilding websites, and on and on and on. My headspace has been taken up with these very pragmatic details to try to keep several of the nonprofits for which I'm responsible afloat. Still, I feel like I have not been taking the time that I need to do important personal development work. Then, of course, there is the constantly overwhelming news cycle that reminds us how late it is on the clock of the world. I'm thinking this morning specifically about the almost 500,000 coronavirus victims in our country, their families, and those struggling with the virus currently. Of our Asian neighbors who are being targeted with white supremacist violence across the country, of indigenous-led resistance camps in northern Minnesota who are attempting to shut down Enbridge Line 3, and of our friends in Texas, currently enduring single-digit temperatures with no household heating due to electrical grid and political failures. I would like to take a brief moment to remember these and others who we are all keeping in our thoughts today. Thank you. I will also admit that I made the mistake of listening to several of the extraordinary speeches last night from current Goshen students during the C. Henry Smith Peace Oratorical Contest. They were very inspiring, but they created a very high bar to reach. So thank you to those students for those excellent speeches last night. So all of that to say, apologies aside, that I appreciate your graciousness as I explore some of my current thinking. To paraphrase someone I heard recently, I'm striving for progress, not perfection. We live in a time of profound disconnectedness, a disconnectedness that is built upon centuries of oppression. Compounding matters, it has been exceedingly difficult over the past year to connect with others, even in small ways, if we've been acting responsibly during the pandemic, even if we've managed to put significant effort into keeping those connections. But while the global pandemic has contributed to an apocalyptic moment for some, a moment of finally seeing things as they really are, it has merely been an acknowledgement of lived reality for those living on the margins. I am primarily addressing those of us for whom this moment has been that time of revelation. We have significant and important work to do if we are to have any hope of change, any hope of real and meaningful community with all our neighbors. We are disconnected from land, we are disconnected from each other, we are disconnected from Creator. The disconnectedness many of us experience is made possible in part because we are not reckoning with, or we choose to ignore, the details, the particularities, the actual people on the front lines of the systems that undergird our daily life. Windowberry, in his essay, Out of Your Car, Off Your Horse, writes, "The evil of the industrial economy, capitalist or communist, is the abstractness inherent in its procedures, its inability to distinguish one place or person or creature from another." And at this specific time, I know many of us are also grieving and struggling as we watch family members, neighbors, and friends lose themselves in conspiracy theories and cult-like behavior. The pandemic has only exacerbated this disconnectedness, causing many of us to wonder if we share the same reality with our neighbors. Some of us have not yet begun to examine our own inherited realities. In nearly all areas of American life, imperialist systems are geared toward abstraction instead of particularity, all of which have been worsened by this moment in time. And while these systems are designed to benefit those in power, most of us hardly recognize that they're there at all. I think we feel it intrinsically or perhaps I hope it to be so, but it is gnawing away at us even if we don't realize it, contributing to a dismembering of our relationships to our place and to one another. Perhaps the most obvious area of disconnection in our time is in the arena of politics. White supremacy continues to be the driving ideological underpinning of our country, excluding and targeting so many of our BIPOC neighbors. Father Greg Boyle, a Jesuit priest in South Central Los Angeles, said, "Mother Teresa, I think, diagnosed the world's ills correctly when she suggested that the problem in the world is that we've just forgotten that we belong to one another." So how do we stand against forgetting that? How do we imagine a circle of compassion and then imagine that nobody is standing outside that circle? How do we obliterate once and for all the illusion that we're separate, that there's an us and a them? We also see this disconnectedness in many other systems. In transportation, our entire infrastructure is built around the automobile, which is an individual transportation mechanism, and it hides most of the infrastructure from common view. This system, of course, is built on the extraction of oil, a finite resource that continues to despoil land and water around the world. And in the process of building pipelines, for example, to transport oil, we ignore indigenous sovereignty throughout the country. In economics or business, we see this more plainly than ever, I think, right now. Amazon and other online retailers are posting record profits while brick and mortar stores struggle to survive during a pandemic. Shopping online is an anonymous experience which abstracts almost all of the details of the supply chain, allowing for exploitation of workers throughout the system. Business activity, of course, is more and more concentrated in the hands of the wealthy and powerful, most of whom don't live in the neighborhoods their businesses serve. And in the case of online things, it's not possible. Wealth inequality continues to skyrocket during the pandemic, with the richest in our country significantly building their wealth, while many struggle simply to stay housed and fed. Windleberry writes, "Our present leaders, people of wealth and power, do not know what it means to take place seriously, to think it worthy for its own sake of love and careful work. They cannot take any place seriously because they must be ready at any moment, by the terms of power and wealth in the modern world, to destroy any place." As a result, we feel entirely disconnected from large economic trends that disproportionately affect many of us, leaving us feeling powerless. If we hadn't noticed it before, it has become more clearly felt than ever. The stock market has nothing to do with the economy most of us participate in every day. This disconnectedness shows up, of course, in food systems. Our agricultural processes have become mechanized and industrialized. I'm sure it would be very difficult for anyone to actually identify where this photo is taken, because it is recognizable by so many of us as so many places across this country. As our food becomes more and more processed, it becomes more and more removed from the people who grew it and the land on which it grew. Consumers feel little to no connection with the farmer to farm workers. So the cheapest price becomes the highest and often only good when shopping for food. Farm workers, while considered essential, continue to be exploited, while multinational food corporations face little consequence for poor working conditions. Undocumented immigrants live in constant fear of deportation while doing excruciating work. Work continues to be devalued on the whole. Most people in the United States do not work where they live, which lessens the investment in both their home community and their work community. That has changed in some interesting ways during the pandemic, as some people have been able to work from home. But of course, for those who are not able to work from home, that continues to be a reality. for reasons that I'll discuss in a minute under housing. The federal minimum wage has not increased in proportion to the cost of living. While worker productivity is at an all-time high, wages have not followed proportionately. Wealth continues to accumulate toward the wealthy, as I mentioned already. The top 1% of Americans have a combined net worth of $34 trillion, 30% of all wealth in this country, while the bottom 50% of the population has just 2 trillion, 2%. In the area of housing, during the pandemic, many people have faced eviction as they were unable to pay for housing when jobs were scaled back, eliminated, or made impossible by the public health emergency. And though we have plenty of public housing, we have plenty of housing stock available, public or otherwise, we continue to avoid solutions for homelessness, dehumanizing our unhoused neighbors in the process. Housing prices in many markets make it impossible for working class people to live in those communities, thereby increasing transportation costs for those who can least afford it. All of these things affect how we live together in community. For many of us, we experience that the individual autonomous consumer is the best thing we can be in our communities. That's all we're known as. We don't know our neighbors and we have little interaction with them despite living next door. Things like zoning restrictions and other archaic things that most of us don't spend much time with have gutted many neighborhoods of informal gathering places like the corner bar or a coffee shop, so that we have fewer incidental, accidental encounters with friends and strangers. And the pandemic, of course, has exacerbated that significantly. I know that I miss our local bar across the street as a third place where I get to see people that I don't otherwise see. And of course, there are fewer and fewer public spaces in neighborhoods. The empire of global consumerism has created this illusion, the promise that the good life is built on extraction, commodification, unlimited consumer choice, and endless expansion. But as Walter Brueggemann recognizes in his book, The Land, that promise concerned human persons who could lead detached, unrooted lives of endless choice and no commitment. It was glamorized around the virtues of mobility and anonymity that seemed so full of promise for freedom and self-actualization. But it failed. It is rootlessness and not meaninglessness that characterizes the current crisis. There are no meanings apart from roots. There are no meanings apart from roots. How then do we begin to understand how we might be connected to and rooted in the places where we live? Think about soil for a minute and all of the interconnected relationships present in healthy soil. I think about soil a lot because I farm at least part of the year. Fungal networks, mycelium, microorganisms, macro and micronutrients, worms, insects, water, air. All of these are in varying and complex relationships to each other, and these interconnections create healthy conditions for life to flourish in the soil. When these relationships are working properly, growth is inevitable in such soil. But when things are missing or have been stripped from the soil, growth becomes very difficult and, in some extreme cases, impossible. So what would it look like for human beings to be rooted in place? And why does that help us create meaning? Here's where we start getting into the notion of what it means to be radical, in the case of radical imagination. Radical from the Latin means of or having roots. We need to go deep. We need to remember that which has been severed, and we need to rebuild the relationships necessary for healthy places. We will not be able to work toward flourishing of all if our places don't have the necessary interconnections, just like soil. Bell Hooks, in her book, Belonging, A Culture of Place, suggests we need to focus on the concrete and personal as opposed to the abstract and institutional, echoing Wendell Berry. In a conversation with Berry, Hooks summarizes some of the thought animating his work. We cannot have health in mind, body, and spirit if we don't have health in relationship to the land. She elaborates further, saying we need to be able to have difficult conversations rooted in a robust culture of place if we are to tend to the wounds of our disconnectedness. Today is Ash Wednesday, not something that all Mennonites participate in. It is the beginning of Lent. In non-pandemic times, I would likely walk to the local Episcopal church right up the street from me to receive a mark of ashes on my forehead as a token of penitence and a recognition of my mortality. From dust you came, and to dust you shall return. The season of Lent is a time for self-reflection and repentance, preparing for the resurrection of Easter. In fact, we cannot experience resurrection without repentance. Ultimately, it is a reminder toward humility, to recognizing and living into our humanness. You can probably tell that the word humility and the word human both derive from the Latin word humus, which of course refers to rich soil, earth. From earth we came, and from earth we shall return. Returning to Walter Brueggemann, human connectedness to the land is suggested in biblical language by a play on words. Adam, that is humankind, has a partner and mate, Adamah, land. Humankind and land are thus linked in a covenantal relationship, analogous to the covenant relationship of marriage. A sound theology requires honoring covenantal relationship. The operating land ethic in our society denies that relationship at enormous cost, not only to the land, but to our common humanity. In the Genesis creation narratives of my Christian tradition, it is clear that Creator makes humans from the earth, from dust plus breath. Humans are created for the earth, to fill it, till it, and keep it. We are sustained by the earth, given the means of food production and trade, a place to live, and companionship. Earth is our home. God created us from and for this earth, and for mutually sustaining relationship with land, plants, animals, and other people. Finally, as image bearers of Creator, we too have the drive to make something of the world, to make culture. Indeed, we can't help but making something of the world. But when we make something of the world in a way that does not indicate fidelity to land, it results in promiscuity and domination, which is what we were just talking about. We are embodied creatures, therefore, which Creator calls good in one of those Genesis creation narratives, and we are directly connected to the entirety of creation. We are part of the ecosystem. We do not stand apart from it. That sounded awkward. We are part of the ecosystem, not apart from it. This is an important and significant philosophical shift that changes how we approach the world. For indigenous cultures around the world, it is impossible to fully live into one's identity apart from the land. And I don't just mean land in some abstract way, I mean a specific place on earth with specific characteristics and sacred qualities. For settler colonialists such as myself, we can find this cosmology difficult to enter into because we've traded a connection with the land for white supremacy. For others who were ripped from their homelands, the wound of that disconnect is still deep. And yet, we all long for connection to land and remain unfulfilled without it. So, what does all of this mean as we consider rootedness? Well, for many of us, it means we've got work to do. We need to remember our covenant relationship with land, specific land. We need to tell the truth about the stories of that place in concrete terms, even when it is difficult or embarrassing or painful to do so. And we need to build meaningful and accountable relationships with our neighbors, the land, and the entire web of connections that makes flourishing life possible there. First, tending to the relationship with the land, again from Brueggemann. Sorry, he wrote a really good book about this. Space means an arena of freedom without coercion or accountability, free of pressures and void of authority. Space may be imaged as weekend, holiday, avocation, and is characterized by a kind of neutrality or emptiness waiting to be filled by our choosing. Such a concern appeals to a desire to get out from under meaningless routine and subjection. But place is a very different matter. Place is a space that has historical meanings, where some things have happened that are now remembered and that provide continuity and identity across generations. Place is space in which important words have been spoken that have established identity, defined vocation, and envisioned destiny. Place is space in which vows have been exchanged, promises have been made, and demands have been issued. Place is indeed a protest against the unpromising pursuit of space. It is a declaration that our humanness cannot be found in escape, detachment, absence of commitment, and undefined freedom. The disconnect we have been experiencing is a direct result of the dismantling of place. A place is where our lives happen on purpose. A place is that outward manifestation of our covenant and our values. A place is not just a point on a map, it's the people, histories, institutions, land, buildings, animals, industry, etc. in that specific area. Second, telling the truth about our place. Simone Weil, the French philosopher and mystic from the early 20th century, makes this connection in her book, The Need for Roots. To be rooted is perhaps the most important and least recognized need of the human soul. It is one of the hardest to define. A human being has roots by virtue of his real, active, and natural participation in the life of a community which preserves in living shape certain particular treasures of the past and certain particular expectations for the future. Certain treasures of the past. That's an interesting turn of phrase. What do we think of as treasures of our past? And when we think of them, are we being honest with ourselves? And if we haven't properly identified meaningful treasures of the past, can we create expectations of the future? Might some treasures be difficult to encounter? For example, the 1619 Project, developed by New York Times journalist Nicole Hannah-Jones and other writers, looked to highlight the year the first enslaved Africans were brought to these shores in an effort to better understand and to honestly wrestle with our nation's ongoing violent and oppressive history and where that finds its roots. It became a bit of a lightning rod in the last year, largely driven by folks who refused to do the work of honest storytelling. In fact, the former administration released an alternative narrative on its second to last day in office, centering 1776 as the only date of importance in the founding of our country, an effort that was widely ridiculed by historians for its cartoonish portrayal. We need to be able to look squarely at the past, tracing the lines back through our ancestries to know how we arrived at where we are today. And we need to get very specific about those histories as they relate to us personally. Again, I want to reiterate that I'm mostly speaking to people who look like myself. The work is very different for others, and I cannot fully speak to a lot of that work. But to be clear also, I'm not just talking about large national histories. In the spirit of Lent, we need to tell the truth about our own family narratives, owning and lamenting the grief and generational trauma embedded there. For those of us who have benefited from the project of settler colonialism, We need to own those stories and acknowledge how we've inherited our social position undeservingly or directly contributed to the oppression of others. These histories can be difficult to tend to, but we cannot move forward to imagine a future without returning to the wound. For those who identify as settlers, I highly recommend the new book, Healing Haunted Histories, A Settler Discipleship of Decolonization by Elaine Enns and Ched Myers as a guide for this work. Finally, we need to build meaningful and accountable relationships, connecting what has been disconnected and remembering what has been dismembered, a step that is not possible without the first two. We will not enjoy healthy communities with flourishing for all if we are unable to create a healthy ecosystem for our communities to grow in. Might there be a way forward for all of us? I really don't know. On some days, I struggle to see the way. And on other days, I get a glimpse that there might be enough of us willing to get our hands dirty to make a go of it. At the end of the day, I'm not the person to make such a calculation. I know that I can tell the truth about myself, my privileges, and that the truth may set me free if I'm willing to put in the work. Our communal project is one of ordinary and extraordinary imagination, deeply rooted in place, remembering old ways of being and dreaming up new ones if we are to see a future beloved community. The trajectory of our work in Three Rivers has, in many ways, been a journey from abstract theory to embodied education. We started our organization 20 years ago, publishing an online magazine with a discussion board and hosting periodic events around the country. And as Regina alluded to in the introduction, in 2009, we purchased an abandoned elementary school, and it changed everything for our community, our intentional community and organization, because we were now stewarding a specific piece of land that required something of us. I'm going to quickly run through some of the work that we've been doing. It is imperfect at best, and it is a halting attempt to create a culture of place in our community. As I have mentioned, at the core of our community is a small group of folks, several households that live in intention with one another, doing the work together. This is our expanded summer crew from last summer. This is the one and only time we were this close not wearing masks. I hesitated to show this picture, but I wanted one picture of us together. That's the core community of Folks for Culture is Not Optional, AmeriCorps Vistas, and AmeriCorps Vista Summer Associates. We will be looking for new folks to fill those positions shortly. So if you're interested, get in touch. And then this has been our core community for a long time, although it has grown recently. I just don't have a photo of us together. Like I said, for a long time, we published an online magazine. We published a magazine called Catapult for 12 years, and then we retired that and published this magazine called Topology, which was all about how we shape our places and how our places shape us. It's currently on hiatus, but there's still some really good stuff there. We also have a sister organization called World Fair, which is a fair trade store that's been in downtown Three Rivers for 17 plus years. And just recently it has shifted significantly, and we've expanded our mission beyond just fair trade products, which many of you are familiar with, to also include local organic and natural grocery and personal care products. That has been one of the shifts that COVID has forced on us to try to stay viable. This is the Huss Project as it looked when we first saw it in 2009. So lest you think it is a schoolhouse, it is not. It is an elementary school that is 27,000 square feet. We were very naive when we got into this, and that's fine. As Regina mentioned, we do a number of things. We have a summer lunch program that's open to any neighborhood kids in our neighborhood. Last summer, We distributed, and we do this in partnership with Three Rivers Schools. Last summer, we distributed over 5,200 meals. We usually do a summer festival where we try to live into the future that we hope for the space year round. And so we have live music, we have art and a rummage sale. We have all kinds of activities for kids, face painting, which I will admit I did not understand when it was first suggested. I understand now it has this extraordinary capacity to help kids just like become someone else and something different, and like just like live into a new person, which is really fun to watch. We often do art projects on site. We've done all kinds of murals. This is a paint by number mural that kids painted, and then we touched up when they were done. We also have a wood shop on site that's sort of in process. It'll be a community wood shop when we're completely ready. We usually do storytelling events. We haven't been doing those during COVID, but a sort of happy surprise well, as much as it can be happy, is that there's a fantastic open mic night held in Three Rivers. It's usually held in our fantastic local bookstore in downtown Three Rivers. And when COVID hit, they could no longer do that, but we have this new pavilion facility that allowed for appropriate spacing outdoors, and everybody wears masks. And it's honestly one of the most beautiful and vulnerable spaces in our city, and the organizers behind it, Andrea and Becca, have just done such a fantastic job of creating space for people to honestly tell their stories. It's really fantastic. And then the biggest project we do is a farm project. We grow a lot of food on a 1-acre urban farm. And most of that food, well, we sell some of it at a farmer's market. We now hold a farmer's market on site at the Huss Project. But most of that food is distributed through various agency partners. And this year we did our own outdoor distribution. Any neighbor who comes and wants to get free produce can do so. Know that we did not grow those bananas on that table. Those were donated by Aldi. And then a recent incarnation, one of the big projects we just completed was the Imaginarium, which is a full renovation of one end of the building for a new and at the moment mostly useless public event space. But it's a beautiful space that we're hoping to use for all kinds of events, and we'll be doing event rentals and things like that. And as you can sort of see, there are a lot of books involved. All of the walls are floor to ceiling bookshelves, because books are one of the ways that we grow and build our imagination at any age. And then we also participate with the Three Rivers Area Faith Community, which is an intentionally multiracial group of mostly pastors doing justice work in our city. So that is like a whirlwind tour of some of the work that we do in our attempts to do some of the things I talked about today. I'll leave you with this Grace Lee Boggs quote. For those of you who are not familiar, Grace Lee Boggs was an activist in Detroit for over 60 years. And in the film American Revolutionary, which I highly recommend, she says, "I stayed involved because I stayed in one place. I grew to love Detroit and feel responsible for it. I can't count the number of times I've had conversations with people about different projects in their city when someone has uttered the phrase, 'They should do something about that.' They? Who's the they? Often, the infamous they is an abstraction that allows us to avoid what we might be able to do about the problem at hand. What might it look like if we dove into the particulars by feeling responsible for our places and the things that happen in them to all our neighbors? If we're able to convert the they into a we, I think powerful things are possible." Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you so much for what you have shared with us this morning, ranging from thinking about being in a very specific, grounded geographical place to the rootedness of all of creation with one another. A question that I would ask as we think about the year that we have spent, and many references, of course, in what you just shared with us about how COVID has affected the work that you do. Um, I'm wondering if, staying with the theme of place and rootedness, if you have observed and longed for, perhaps, but maybe more observed, any kind of gift that this year of isolation has contributed to that kind of conversation. What are the unexpected, or what is an unexpected thing that might have happened because we've had to do things in new ways, because we've had to be isolated in our places and our spaces?
That's a great question. Thank you. Yeah, I always, of course, hesitate and want to throw the qualifier in. It, uh, because good things can happen out of bad things doesn't make the bad things worthwhile. And I wish that this were not happening to our world for all kinds of reasons. Um, and I know that there have been a multiplicity of experiences of this time, and that my experience is one, but I have family members who are servers at restaurants, and friends in Three Rivers who are servers at restaurants, and their experience of this time has been very different, right? Um, and and so I don't, with all of those caveats, I just want to make sure. But for those of us who were in somewhat privileged positions to be able to do some of the stay-at-home things, and be able um, to distance more thoroughly. I know that for Kirsten and I, um, we've gone for more walks this year than we've ever done. Pretty much almost every day we go for a walk for at least an hour. Um, and in a city the size of ours, which is only about 8,000 people, that means we've walked most of the streets in our city. We weren't keeping track, so I'm sure we've missed a couple, but seeing our place in that way,
Mhm.
in the slow, deliberative pace of walking, has been a gift for us. Um, and we can now, identify most houses in our city. Oh yeah, are you talking about this one on this street? Oh yeah, I know that one. Oh, with the dogs, yep. So like getting rooted in that way is good. I had hoped to spend more time in study this year, but that didn't prove to be a possibility. Um, and then I will say at the Hus project specifically, um, and not to make this all about me, but I am, I guess. The Hus project specifically, because we weren't doing programming last summer, we had a little bit more space to do a whole bunch of infrastructure projects that we never have time for.
Mhm.
Um, and so building our capacity for our farm was the main goal. And so we were able to build a greenhouse with funding from the local community foundation, and finally clean up areas of the farm that haven't been cleaned in 5 years, and all sorts of things, finally tend to the soil in the ways that we've always wanted to but have not had time to. um, so I think some of those ways that people have been able to be
Yeah.
in their places has been a potential unexpected gift.
Mhm. Thank you. And I do appreciate your naming at the beginning of your response that, yeah, this period has been different for different ones of us. And the opportunities that might come to us, those of us in specific situations, are not fairly spread among
Right.
all people. And so that is a really important reminder, but opening up that space to think about doing things in new ways and tending to the things that we haven't been able to tend to. And maybe even in those spaces, I'm thinking about all of the things that people on our campus might have that space opened up for, to feed into this very conversation that you're leading us in. What are the connections that we need to either make anew or remake that remind us thoroughly how much we are part of an ecosystem? I love that language. I love Brueggemann, and so I appreciate your bringing his thoughts as well as many others into what you've shared with us. Thank you so much for this time. Were you about to?
Oh, I was just
Okay.
going to say thank you to you as well for your hospitality. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for this time. Thank you for any who were able to join us this morning, and stay warm and stay safe.